In other news, folks, Sinn Féin is set to win most seats in the 2022 local elections in Northern Ireland. Voters have chosen an Irish Republican party to actually lead the UK region's power-sharing government for the first time. But will Stormont now be doomed to fail? I'm asking, is this the end of power-sharing? Joining me to discuss right now is Jamie Bryson, a unionist activist and the author of Brexit Betrayed, Writings from the Referendum to the Betrayal Act, the former DUP MP Emma Little-Pengelly, and Alison Morrison, journalist from the Belfast Telegraph. Thank you all very much for your company. Emma, can I start with you, please? Jerry Kelly, a Sinn Féin MLA, he's just been shown in the news there in saying, look, folks, the DUP need to accept that this is democracy. He's not wrong there, is he, Emma?
Well, we have a very particular type of system here in Northern Ireland, of course, mandatory coalition. That means that you can be First Minister here with, maybe 22, 23% of the vote. However, in this case, Sinn Féin have received 29% of the first preference vote. They have had a very solid election. But I think the key thing to remember here is actually very few seats have really changed hands. We went into this election with the DUP and Sinn Féin on very similar numbers. The DUP had lost one of theirs to becoming independent. So in the last election, DUP had 28, Sinn Féin had 27. Now, it looks likely that if Sinn Féin do gain any, they'll only gain maybe one. And the DUP are likely to lose about 3, possibly 4 seats. So it's quite a small change, but it is a significant one in that it places Sinn Féin for the first time in a position that they would be First Minister if indeed the institutions are restored. Now, that said, I think it's really important for your viewers that actually the unionist and nationalist designations remain very similar, even not just from the last election, but from what they were even back in 1998. So, both the unionist and nationalist sort of blocks, as it were, sitting in around 40 to 42%, with unionism still the largest designation. However, because of the system that we have, the small sort of change of seats has caused the situation with Sinn Féin. And of course, that's largely due to the protocol. The DUP has lost votes to a harder line party on its right, the TUV. And of course, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson had made clear, very, very unhappy around the protocol. DUP voters very unhappy around the protocol. So, 250,000 people, the same amount of people who voted for Sinn Féin, very clearly saying to Boris Johnson, to the British government, this protocol needs to get sorted out. And until it gets sorted out, there won't be power sharing restored in Northern Ireland.
Alison, is that the real story here then? The real story is the story of the DUP, right? This was a rejection of the DUP, not of unionism, which Emma says there has a majority, but it was the collapse of the party. That's perhaps the real story here.
Well, look, Emma put a great spin on that, but in reality, the TUV, the hardline TUV, will go back into the Assembly should it sit with one MLA. They did not add a single seat. And in an STV election, every person who may have given their first preference vote to the TUV will have given the second preference vote to another unionist party, namely the DUP. So to try and say that they lost votes because of the protocol, first of all, is a nonsense because they haven't lost anything. The TUV have not made massive gains, as was expected. And the fact is that the growth of the middle ground is the second biggest story of this election. And the Alliance Party, who don't designate as either unionist or nationalist, are in favour of minor reforms to the protocol, but not the scrapping of it. Sinn Féin are now by far the largest party. They are also in favour of reforming parts of the protocol to make it work with more ease, but not with getting rid of it. So how then can the British government go back and make concessions, which would basically be at the behest of the DUP, which is now, in terms of their opposition to the protocol, a minority in Northern Ireland, in opposition to against the mandate that has been given to Sinn Féin and the Alliance Party. And all this is to do is to save face of Geoffrey Donaldson, to allow him to put his party back into the executive. The fact is that the protocol needs reforms. We know that there are parts of it that do not work properly, that's causing problems to businesses. But I think that where the DUP probably went wrong in this election was not recognising the real issues affecting their voters, affecting the unionist people of Northern Ireland. were things like the cost of living crisis, were the shambles of our health service, and not those sort of constitutional questions, because whether Sinn Féin are First Minister on Monday or not, and that will not happen given the fact that, they have to designate and the DUP have indicated that they won't nominate a Deputy First Minister, you were no closer to having a border poll in Northern Ireland. The only person who can call a border poll is the Secretary of State. That has to be with the will of the majority of people, and that's not something that's going to happen in the next 5 years. So I think that they need to stop using scare tactics, which has terrified the unionist voters into thinking that their sovereignty is at risk, because it isn't. And I think that they need to get on with trying to work the institutions to weigh this to the benefit. If you want to save the union and save the union in Northern Ireland, well then make Northern Ireland look like a profitable, lovely place to live, a place where people feel comfortable, rather than constantly saying it's under attack and that your sovereignty is under attack and having people living in fear. I think that that's where unionism went wrong in this election.
So you've heard what Alison's got to say there, Jamie. Would you accept that actually scrapping the protocol outright doesn't have democratic consent, because actually Sinn Féin won fair and square here?
Well, good afternoon, Darren. Look, Alison's just so long there, I'm not sure which part of it to pick apart first. In the first instance, so we'll start at the end of her contribution, where she said there was no constitutional threat. The Court of Appeal in Northern Ireland has said the Act of Union, which is the Union, has been subjugated. Now, how the subjugation of the Union is anything other than a constitutional threat is beyond me, so that's incorrect. The next incorrect point is that 250,000 people in Northern Ireland voted for what are now now, you have to remember, in this election, the DUP moved decisively to a more hardline position, to effectively a TUV position of being almost anti-agreement, seeking changes on the principle of consent to actually protect the substance of the union, and an outright rejection of the protocol, with one of their 7 key tests being the full restoration of Article 6 of the Act of Union, which would make any dual market access impossible. It would mean Northern Ireland has to be entirely within the UK single market and out with any access or any privileged access to the EU single market. And 250,000 people in Northern Ireland voted for that. So the DUP didn't lose votes because they were being too hardline, because they were going on too much about the protocol. They lost votes because for a long time they weren't being hard enough on the protocol, and that's why 65,000 people voted for the anti-agreement, most hardline part of unionism, the TUV. Now, it's an STV election. That didn't, as Alison, one of the only correct things she said was that didn't, of course, translate into seats. But in terms of the mood of unionism, it's very, very clear. And the Ulster Unionist Party, who were the party who would have capitulated on the protocol, I mean, I think they're almost desperate to be Sinn Féin's deputy. Their vote absolutely collapsed. Their leader had to scrape in on one of the later counts. But the most important point in this, and it's important for your viewers to understand this, Darren, is that Alison talks there about democratic legitimacy and that the anti-protocol is in a minority. And I find that extraordinary, because for 25 years, the unionist community, for at least a significant amount of that time, had a democratic right to govern, a democratic majority, and that was denied to us because we were told that nationalism had to be in government as of right, that the minority of nationalism had to have an equal place in government in Northern Ireland. We were told that the Belfast Agreement was about cross-community consent. It's in there, Strand 1, 5D. Key decisions must have cross-community consent. And all of a sudden now, when nationalism, when people like Alison think that they can put the foot on the neck of the unionist community, all of a sudden cross-community consent doesn't matter. I mean, let's just disavow that now and start talking about majority. So equality and cross-community consent was all well and good when it suited nationalism, but the very moment that they think they have a majority, all of a sudden that all falls by the wayside. They don't want equality, they want supremacy.
I'm going to let Alison come back to reply to that in a second. But Emma, I want to just really quickly ask you, do you accept that actually for the vast majority of voters in Northern Ireland, talking about these constitutional issues wasn't a key concern? They were, as Alison says, focused on issues about healthcare and the economy.
Well, Darren, of course, we have three distinct blocks, really, of voters here. You have Nationalists and Republicans. Of course, they don't care about the union, so they don't care as much about the protocol. They don't care about the impact on this around our United Kingdom. In the centre, you've got sort of the Alliance Party. They're kind of neutral on the union. So again, they don't really care if this protocol is really bad for the union of our United Kingdom. But when you look to unionists have been very united on this. Bear in mind as well, Darren, that the Nationalist bloc has actually dropped 2 seats. The middle ground has really sort of just consolidated all of the smaller parties into the Alliance Party, but it has been a very strong showing still, much better than what some people predicted for unionist parties, and particularly for the DUP and the TUV. And both of those parties importantly saying, vote for this in this election, send a clear message to Boris Johnson. Look, the key thing here is, if this border was in the middle of Ireland, in the middle between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, Sinn Féin would not be sitting in the Northern Ireland Assembly. They just wouldn't. So we'll hear a lot about people saying, get back in there, just ignore it, let's fiddle while Rome burns. Actually, no, unionists are saying this is real danger to our union, of our United Kingdom. There's a border down the Irish Sea. Boris Johnson, you have to sort it out.
Alison, I want to let you come back to what Jamie was saying there. Is he right to suggest that perhaps now turning around and saying, well, look, you've got to get around the table, guys, and negotiate? Where was that negotiation and the spirit of that democratic consent when actually unionism was the biggest party?
And that's the Good Friday Agreement, and unionists signed up to the Good Friday Agreement. The Ulster Unionist Party was the largest party, and they signed up to those principles. And I think that what happened was people have started trying to use the issues of the protocol, which are very genuine and do exist, in order to go back and tear up that agreement, because it's something that they didn't like at the start. I think Jimmy would be quite happy if the whole, people just burned the whole house down and started from scratch. He's against the Good Friday Agreement. He's using the protocol as a way to try and rip up the Good Friday Agreement. But the fact is that the Alliance Party are not. Well, when Emma says that the Alliance Party don't have a position on the union, the majority of those votes come from soft Jew unionists. If you look at the demographics and where those people have been elected, we've just had an Alliance Party MLA elected instead of Mervyn Story, a DUP person. The fact is that they're soft Jew unionists. There are people who are quite happy with the status quo. They're quite happy to remain within the union as long as the union is a comfortable and profitable place to live. They're not hung up on those very far-right social issues such as gay marriage and reproductive rights. They're not hung up and worrying every day about the safety of a future border poll, which they know is a long way off in the future. They basically just want to see this place prosper. And I think that was the vote that the Alliance Party really tapped into. I do think that the DUP, rather than chasing those hardline votes, should maybe look at that section of unionism to see how they can attract those people back into the unionist family rather than send them to that sort of others designation.
Right. I mean, sadly, folks, I've got to end it there. I'm being told I've got to go to the news. Oh, I would love to have continued this conversation because I think Northern Ireland does not get spoken about in our national conversation anywhere near enough. So I thank you all for your time today. That was Jamie Bryson, Emma Little-Pengelly and Alison Morris. Thank you for joining me today.